You were told the 1980s belonged to originality. That is the lie. The truth is far more uncomfortable. Hollywood was quietly cloning one film and hoping you would not notice. Alien did not just inspire a generation, it created a shadow industry of imitation. Cheap, bold, sometimes shameless. And here is the twist. Some of those copies hit harder than the original ever did. Number 12, Blue Monkey. A hospital becomes a battlefield. Not with soldiers, but with something far worse. Something that should never have been born. Number 12 is Blue Monkey. And this is what happens when the alien formula is stripped from space and dropped into a place meant for healing. A greenhouse accident brings in a strange infection. A patient is exposed. Then the hospital locks down. No one gets out. No one understands what is growing inside those walls. What follows is a slow, tightening nightmare. Doctors run tests while something evolves beyond their control. Corridors turn into traps. Rooms become cages. The creature starts small but grows into a towering insect horror that feels like a mutation of everything that came before it. You can see the DNA of Alien in every scene. The isolation, the creeping dread. The idea that the threat is not just outside but inside the human body itself. But here is where Blue Monkey separates itself. It leans into a colder clinical fear. Instead of space marines, you have exhausted doctors. Instead of a spaceship, you have a quarantined hospital filled with civilians. The tension is not built on action, it is built on helplessness, and that makes every moment hit harder. The film never reached mainstream success. It slipped through the cracks of the decade, but its atmosphere and practical effects give it a quiet power that many bigger films failed to capture. Forgotten. Ignored. Yet disturbingly effective. Number 11, Deep Space. It crashes without warning. A satellite falls from the sky, and with it comes something that should never have reached Earth. Number 11 is Deep Space, and this is where the alien blueprint collides with gritty urban crime drama. No distant planets, no deep space missions, just suburban streets turning into a hunting ground. The story wastes no time. A classified experiment goes wrong, and a creature escapes into the city. What follows feels like a fusion of Alien and hard-edged police thrillers. Detectives step into a case that makes no sense. Bodies appear with brutal wounds. Witnesses vanish. The monster moves through sewers, warehouses, and abandoned buildings, turning ordinary locations into claustrophobic nightmares. The ripoff elements are unmistakable. The stalking creature, the slow reveal, the sense that humans are completely outmatched. But Deep Space adds something different. It replaces isolation with familiarity. This horror is not far away. It is right outside your door. That shift changes everything. It makes the fear more immediate and more personal. Despite its low budget, the film commits fully to practical effects. The creature design echoes the iconic xenomorph but twists it just enough to feel new. There are moments that clearly mirror scenes audiences already knew. Yet there is an energy here that refuses to feel lazy. It feels desperate, like a film trying to prove it belongs. It never found a wide audience. It was buried under bigger releases. But for those who discover it now, it stands as a raw and fascinating example of how far a ripoff could go when it had just enough ambition. Number 10, Forbidden World. There is no attempt to hide it, no effort to disguise the influence. Number 2 is Forbidden World, and this is the moment the ripoff becomes completely unapologetic. A remote research station. A scientific experiment gone wrong. A creature that evolves faster than anyone can understand. It is the blueprint of Alien rebuilt, almost scene by scene, and yet it refuses to feel lifeless. The story moves fast. There is no slow burn here. The organism is created to solve a crisis. Instead, it becomes the crisis. It escapes, it adapts, it feeds. Every corridor becomes a trap, and every decision leads to another mistake. The film does not rely on subtlety. It pushes forward with constant movement and constant threat. What makes it stand out is its raw energy. This is exploitation filmmaking at full force. Scenes hit harder because they do not hold back. Practical effects dominate the screen. The creature changes shape. The violence feels immediate. And beneath all of that, there is a strange sense of momentum that never lets the film slow down. It borrows everything: structure, setting, tension, even character dynamics. But instead of weakening it, that familiarity makes it easier to fall into. You know what is coming. And that anticipation builds its own kind of suspense. Forbidden World never achieved mainstream respect. It was seen as disposable, a quick attempt to copy a success. But time has shifted that perspective. Now, it stands as one of the clearest examples of how a ripoff can still deliver something powerful when it commits fully. It may not be original, but it is undeniably effective. Number 9. The Terror Within. The world is already dead. That is where this story begins. Number 9 is The Terror Within, and it pushes the Alien formula into a direction that feels both familiar and disturbingly extreme. Humanity is hiding. Survivors are trapped inside underground bunkers while the surface is overrun by something monstrous, something that does not just kill, something that reproduces. A creature breaches the bunker, and from that moment the structure becomes brutally clear. Tight hallways, limited weapons, no escape. The same suffocating setup that defined Alien is now amplified by desperation. These are not explorers. These are the last remnants of humanity. Every loss feels final. But here is where the film crosses into darker territory. It does not just copy Alien. It escalates its most disturbing idea: the reproductive horror. The creature does not simply attack. It uses human bodies as a means to continue its existence. The tension becomes psychological as much as physical. Fear of death is replaced by fear of transformation. Despite its low budget, the film commits fully to its grim tone. Practical effects carry the horror. Performances lean into panic and hopelessness. It feels raw, almost uncomfortable in its execution. And that is exactly why it lingers. The Terror Within never achieved mainstream recognition. It lived and died in the shadows of bigger films. But it represents something important. A moment when rip-off cinema stopped playing safe and started pushing boundaries. It is not just imitation, it is escalation. And that makes it impossible to ignore once you finally discover it. Number 8. Alien 2. On Earth. It should not even exist. That is what makes it impossible to ignore. Number 8 is Alien 2 on Earth. And this is one of the boldest cash grabs of the entire decade. A film that took the name of Alien and ran with it before anyone could stop it. No connection, no permission, just raw ambition wrapped in chaos. The setup feels deceptively grounded. A mysterious space capsule returns to Earth carrying strange blue rocks. Harmless at first glance. Then they crack open. What emerges is pure nightmare. Small creatures latch onto human hosts and trigger violent deaths that explode in bursts of gore. The structure mirrors Alien but strips away the polished science fiction and replaces it with something far more primal. Most of the film unfolds inside underground caves, tight spaces, total darkness, echoing footsteps. It becomes less about spectacle and more about suffocation. The characters are not trained professionals. They are ordinary people trapped in a nightmare they do not understand. That shift creates a different kind of fear, less heroic, more desperate. What makes this film striking is its refusal to feel safe. It is messy, it is uneven, but when it hits, it goes further than most mainstream films ever dared. The gore is excessive. The pacing is unpredictable. And the atmosphere carries a strange, dreamlike tension that makes every moment feel unstable. It was ignored, dismissed, even ridiculed. But beneath the reputation is something fascinating. A film that did not just copy a trend. It hijacked it, twisted it, and turned it into something uniquely chaotic. A true relic of an era where imitation had no limits. Number 7. The Brain. In the midst of the 1980s influx of sci-fi horror ripoffs, The Brain stands out as a bizarre but fascinating attempt to mix the psychological horror of Alien with a social commentary on media manipulation and control. This film centers around a malevolent, telepathic brain that is manipulated by a shady television executive to influence the minds of the public. The setup is wild. A brain is kept in a research facility, but it has the ability to control people's actions through its telepathic powers, creating a form of body horror. But instead of the classic space isolation or underwater dread, the brain focuses on the grotesque relationship between media and society. The citizens of a small town fall prey to this brain's influence, becoming violent and uncontrollable, while the protagonist fights against the institution that controls the terrifying creature.
While the concept is certainly odd, the film's low-budget approach lends itself well to its quirky charm. The gore is extreme, and the film's tone swings from unsettling to almost campy at times. Despite being a clear alien derivative, The Brain is uniquely memorable for its critique of mind control and its surreal execution. It's a film that certainly makes you question whether it's a straight-up horror flick or an absurd commentary on the media.
Number 6. Deep Star 6. Pressure crushes before fear even has time to breathe. Number 6 is Deep Star 6, and this is where the alien blueprint dives into the ocean and replaces silence with crushing weight. A military crew builds an experimental base on the ocean floor. They dig too deep. They open something that was never meant to be disturbed, and the moment it wakes, the structure becomes terrifyingly familiar. Isolation returns, not in space this time, under miles of water. No sunlight, no escape. The corridors tighten, the walls feel thinner, and something ancient begins to move through the darkness. You can feel the DNA of Alien in every decision. One by one, the crew is picked apart. Panic spreads faster than the creature itself. But Deep Star 6 brings a different kind of fear. The ocean becomes a second enemy. Equipment fails. Pressure bends steel. Every mistake carries immediate consequences. Characters are not just fighting a monster. They are fighting the environment that surrounds them. That dual threat gives the film a constant edge. The creature design leans into raw physicality. No elegance, no mystery, just brute force tearing through confined spaces. Practical effects carry the weight, and when the attacks hit, they feel heavy and immediate. The tension builds through chaos rather than silence. It arrived just before bigger underwater films took over the spotlight. It was overshadowed, dismissed as another imitation. But there is a harsh energy here that deserves recognition. It is not subtle. It is not refined. It is survival-driven panic captured on screen. And once it starts, it rarely lets go. Number 5. Leviathan. It looks bigger. It sounds bigger. And for a moment, it almost feels like the version that could have replaced the original. Number 5 is Leviathan, and this is what happens when the Alien formula is given a studio budget and a cast that demands attention. The setting mirrors Deep Star 6. An underwater mining station, a crew cut off from the world. But the threat this time is far more unpredictable. The horror does not arrive fully formed. It evolves. A contaminated discovery is brought aboard. At first, it seems harmless. Then bodies begin to change. Flesh mutates. Identity disappears. The film pulls from both Alien and The Thing, creating a hybrid that feels unstable at every moment. The tension comes from uncertainty. Anyone can become the threat. Trust breaks down. Paranoia replaces logic. And as the creature grows, it absorbs everything in its path. The design becomes more grotesque with each transformation, not a single entity but a fusion of victims. What makes Leviathan stand out is its execution. The performances ground the chaos. The effects are ambitious. The scale feels larger than most films in this category. It pushes beyond simple imitation and tries to compete. That ambition gives it a different weight. Yet it's still vanished. Released into a crowded year, lost between bigger titles. It never found the audience it was built for. But looking back, it stands as one of the most complete examples of the era. A ripoff that refused to stay small. A film that reached for something greater and came closer than most people remember. Number 4, Creature. It feels familiar the moment the ship touches down. A remote moon, a silent structure, something waiting in the dark. Number 4 is Creature, and this is one of the most direct attempts to recreate the experience of Alien without ever admitting it. The setup is almost identical. A crew arrives. They investigate. They awaken something that should have stayed buried. But Creature adds a subtle twist that shifts the tension. The threat is not just physical, it is psychological. The organism can control minds. It spreads through influence as much as attack. That single idea turns every character into a potential danger. Trust collapses. Alliances mean nothing. Anyone could already be compromised. The film leans heavily on atmosphere. Long corridors, dim lighting, echoing footsteps. It builds dread through repetition and silence. Then suddenly, it breaks that silence with violence. The creature itself feels like a distorted echo of the xenomorph. Not as iconic, not as refined, but still unsettling in its presence. What makes Creature stand out is its commitment to the formula. It does not try to hide what it is doing. It embraces it completely. And yet within that imitation there is effort. The performances push the fear. The pacing holds tension longer than expected. The paranoia element gives it a different identity. It never reached a wide audience. It slipped into obscurity almost immediately. But it represents something important. A moment when filmmakers believed they could rebuild a masterpiece piece by piece and still create something worth watching. And in this case, they came closer than most. Number 3. Inseoid. This is where imitation becomes obsession. Number 3 is Inseoid, and it takes the most disturbing idea from Alien and refuses to look away. The fear of what grows inside the human body. The loss of control. The transformation that cannot be stopped. A scientific team explores a distant planet. They enter underground caves, searching for answers. Instead, they find something alive, something that chooses a host. From that moment, the film changes completely. One of the crew becomes the center of the horror, not a victim waiting to die, a carrier becoming something else. What follows is relentless. The character's descent is physical and mental. Strength increases, humanity fades, violence becomes instinct. The crew is no longer facing an external threat. They are trapped with someone who is changing into it. That shift creates a different kind of tension, personal, intimate, unavoidable. The film does not soften its approach. It pushes into uncomfortable territory. Scenes feel raw, at times almost surreal. It blends science fiction with elements that feel closer to psychological horror. The result is chaotic, but unforgettable. Inseoid was rejected by critics, labeled excessive, dismissed as exploitation, and because of that it disappeared. But beneath that reaction is a film that committed fully to its concept. It did not just imitate, it amplified. It took one idea and stretched it to its limit, and in doing so, it created something that still lingers long after it ends. Number 2, The Intruder Within. It begins in silence, a drill pushing deeper than it ever should, metal screaming against the earth. Then, something answers back. Number 10 is The Intruder Within, and this is what happens when the Alien formula is forced into the rigid limits of network television. No explicit gore, no graphic terror, just pressure, just dread, just the slow realization that something is growing where it should not exist. An isolated oil rig becomes the stage. Workers dig into the ocean floor and bring up more than rock. They awaken a life form that follows a familiar pattern: infection, gestation, emergence. The structure mirrors Alien almost beat for beat. A host is chosen, a body becomes a vessel, and the crew realizes too late that the threat is already inside them. But the real tension comes from restriction. This is a television production. It cannot show everything, so it suggests, it implies, it lets your mind fill in the horror, dim lighting, tight corridors, faces filled with fear as something unseen moves closer. The creature is hidden more than revealed, and that makes it feel larger than the budget could ever allow. What makes this film striking is how seriously it takes itself. No camp, no parody, just a straight-faced attempt to translate one of the most intense sci-fi horror blueprints into a format that was never built to handle it. And somehow, it works. Not perfectly, not loudly, but effectively. It aired once. It faded quickly. And yet it remains one of the clearest examples of how far the Alien formula spread, even into places it had no business being. Number 1, Galaxy of Terror. This is where everything peaks. Number 1 is Galaxy of Terror, and it represents the most extreme and unforgettable evolution of the Alien formula. A rescue mission lands on a dead world. The terrain feels wrong. The air feels wrong. And soon the crew realizes they are not facing a single creature. They are facing something far more unpredictable. Each member of the team is hunted by their own fear. Not just attacked, targeted. The film twists the familiar structure of Alien into something psychological. The corridors are still there. The isolation remains. But the threat becomes personal, internal. Every weakness becomes a weapon against them. What makes this film impossible to ignore is how far it goes. It does not play safe. It does not stay within boundaries. scenes unfold that feel chaotic and disturbing in ways few films dared at the time. The tension builds through unpredictability. You cannot anticipate what comes next because the rules are constantly shifting. Behind the chaos, there is surprising craftsmanship. The sets feel larger than the budget suggests. The effects push beyond expectation. There is a raw creativity that elevates the film beyond simple imitation. It feels like a desperate attempt to outdo its inspiration. It was controversial. It was dismissed. And then it was forgotten. But that is exactly why it belongs here. Because beneath the reputation lies a film that took the idea of a ripoff and pushed it to its breaking point. It is not just a copy. It is an explosion of everything that made the original work. And in that chaos, it becomes something uniquely its own. So here we are, 12 films that should have disappeared forever. Instead, they survived in the shadows, waiting to be rediscovered. Not perfect, not polished, but impossible to ignore once seen. Now the question is simple. Were they failures, or were they truths Hollywood tried to hide?